In the American school systems, there is a significant disproportionality of certain students from racial and ethnic groups and low income backgrounds being identified for special education. This might negatively affect students' academic and social emotional development. Students of color are more often identified for special education, placed in more restrictive educational settings, and disciplined at higher rates than their peers. Students living in poverty are more often identified with learning disabilities than students living in households with much higher incomes. Rationale is to develop an awareness and possible solutions regarding disproportionality in special education and misidentifying minority students and placing them in more restrictive environments. Disproportionate identification of students with learning disabilities among certain minority subgroups presents unfair treatment and unequal academic opportunities. Sullivan and Bell indicate that race, gender, and socio-demographic characteristics predict the risk of identification with learning disability, cognitive impairments, and emotional disturbance. Disproportionality in special education is a complex issue that involves systematic bias, legal policies, and ethical responsibility. Schiffer reveals that the fact that identification with a learning disability is correlated with social demographic characteristics suggests issues with equalities in school. Disproportionality in special education closely relates to the Model Code of Ethics, stating that all professionals educators are obligated to the highest level of professional and ethical practice to frame educational decisions and advocating for equitable educational opportunities for all students. To achieve more equitable outcomes for disproportionality in special education, efforts should focus on avoiding discriminatory methods during the referral and evaluation process. Evaluation should be completed considering cultural and ethical factors of affecting students' performance. In my current role as a special education teacher, I observe disproportionality due to the over-identification of students of color and students from low socioeconomic status. In contrast, I observe the overrepresentation of white and Asian students in gifted programs. Some studies have shown that Black and Hispanic elementary students are less likely to receive specialized services. Elder states that disability among Black and Hispanic students is lower than white students born in similar economic and health conditions. Racial and ethnic disproportionality can be misinterpreted as something that students of color are underrepresented or overrepresented in special education and placed in behavior programs or resource rooms. The overrepresentation of Black students in special education has increased after Brown versus Board of Education, forbidding segregation in public schools based on race. This rapid increased the oppression of historically marginalized students. Educators need to know how bias manifests in the classroom, have courageous conversations about race, develop cultural competence, infuse culturally responsive practices, and advocate for adopting culturally responsive identification process. Disproportionate representation of African American and minority students with low socioeconomic status might have a hidden cause: the confirmation bias, the tendency to seek things that align with one's unconscious beliefs while overlooking others. One example of unconscious confirmation bias includes the perception of Black boys' behaviors that may be based on cultural misunderstandings and rationalized perceptions of criminality. Some solutions include having difficult conversations about race and living in poverty. Singleton and Hayes points out that educators should try the four agreements: to have courageous conversations, stay engaged, expect to experience discomfort, speak your truth, and expect lack of closure. To alleviate disproportionality, educators need to be open to bias awareness training, talk to the students about bias, provide intervention, and teach the parents about the process, and implement culturally responsive teaching practices. Schools' efforts should focus on preventing inappropriate identification where academic difficulties arise from cultural differences and lack of education. Schools should also hire more teachers of color, offer professional development training about cultural competence, and organize parent workshops about improving the children's academic opportunities. The disproportionality might be viewed as underrepresentation or overrepresentation of students of color and minority students. The action steps for disproportionality should embody the concept of both and thinking, embracing the complexity of the dilemma and coexisting aspects. The proposed action steps have the potential to advance the equity outcome by lowering the chances of biased placement in special education. Also, implementing culturally responsive teaching practices, early intervention, and professional development about bias will create an equitable learning environment.